Every collapse has a moment where everything could have been prevented, a single weakness ignored, a single assumption unchallenged, a single flaw left untouched because the system seems stable enough. When the shock arrives, everyone blames the crisis, but institutions know the crisis wasn't the cause, it was the trigger. The real cause was the weakness that had been sitting quietly inside the system the entire time. In every failure, the system whispers its fragility long before it yells it out. A slight wobble, a subtle crack, a moment where the truth is visible to anyone willing to look, but almost no one does. People call it bad luck, institutions call it bad architecture, because collapse is rarely a surprise, it's always a consequence. Consequence of ignoring quiet signals, trusting stability too much, and assuming resilience instead of engineering it. Risk reinforcement exists because institutions refuse to let the same weakness destroy them twice. They know hope isn't strategy, reinforcement is. The failure didn't have to happen, and the next one doesn't either. Welcome back to the Risk Manager's Guide to Money. I'm Jay Malcolm, and today we're talking about risk reinforcement, the institutional discipline of strengthening weak architecture after a system's been pushed to its limit and shown the truth of what it can handle. Institutions don't assume resilience, they don't assume strength, they don't assume surviving a crisis means they're prepared for the next one. Survival is not evidence of durability, it's evidence of proximity. Proximity to failure, proximity to collapse, proximity to the edge of what a system can withstand. That's why institutions rebuild immediately after a stress event. They don't wait for the next shock, they don't hope conditions stay calm, they don't pretend the system held up well enough. They know that whatever broke under pressure will break again, and whatever barely held will fail the next moment volatility returns. People rarely operate this way. Most people treat crisis as interruption and not as revelation. They rush back to normal, relieved to have made it through, eager to forget how close they came to breaking. But forgetting is how fragility becomes permanent. Returning to normal is how the next collapse becomes inevitable. Risk reinforcement is the opposite of forgetting. It's the discipline of remembering exactly where the system failed and rebuilding it so it never fails that way again. It's how institutions convert vulnerability into strength, collapse into clarity, and pressure into architecture. This episode is about that transformation, the one that happens after the crisis, the one that determines whether the next shock destroys you or reveals how much stronger you've become. After a system is pushed to its limits, institutions don't rush back into operations. They pause, they analyze, they gather the truth with a level of honesty most people avoid. They want to understand not just what broke, but why it broke, how it broke, and what the sequence reveals about the system's deeper architecture. This moment, the post-stress reckoning, is where the real work begins. It's where institutions confront the uncomfortable reality that the system wasn't as strong as they believed. It's where they acknowledge that survival doesn't mean success. It simply means the weaknesses didn't reach their breaking point yet. Your life needs the same reckoning. Surviving a crisis doesn't mean you're resilient. At the very least, it means you were lucky. Every system has underlying architecture, a set of assumptions, processes, habits, and structures that determine how it behaves under pressure. When a system collapses, institutions don't blame the moment, they blame the architecture. They look at the design choices that made collapse inevitable. They examine the outdated frameworks, the fragile components, the missing safeguards, the blind spots that were baked into the system long before the shock arrived. People rarely examine their own architecture. They blame the event, they blame the timing, they blame the circumstance. But collapse is never about the moment, it's about the structure beneath the moment. Risk reinforcement begins by rebuilding that structure. Institutions know that systems don't fail alone and that people fail with them. Behavior under pressure is a part of the architecture. When volatility rises, judgment shifts, communication tightens or collapses, discipline erodes, fear accelerates decision making, old habits reappear, and old weaknesses resurface. Institutions treat behavioral fragility the same way they treat structural fragility, as something that must be reinforced, redesigned, and strengthened. They don't moralize it, they don't shame it, they engineer around it. Your life needs the same approach. Behavioral weakness isn't a flaw in your character, it's a flaw in your design. Every crisis has a moment, a precise moment where you broke. Not physically, not emotionally, but architecturally. It's the moment where your system exceeded its capacity, the moment where your habits couldn't hold, where your discipline buckled, where your assumptions failed, the moment where your internal architecture revealed its limits. Institutions study this moment with forensic precision. They want to understand the exact point where resilience gave way. They want to know what triggered the collapse, what accelerated it, and what allowed it to spread. People rarely study their own breaking point. They remember the pain, but not the pattern. They remember the shock, but not the sequence. But if you understand the moment you broke, you can reinforce the part of you that needs rebuilding. Institutions don't hope systems get stronger, they design them to be stronger. Reinforcement is intentional, it's engineered, it's built into the architecture so the next shock doesn't create the same collapse. This is where institutions redesign the system, not to return it to its previous state, but to create a new state that can withstand pressures the old system couldn't survive. They strengthen the weak joints, rebuild the fragile components, and eliminate the vulnerabilities that make collapse possible. People often rely on hope instead of design. I'll handle it better the next time. I learned my lesson. I won't let that happen again. But hope isn't reinforcement, design is. Institutions don't just fix weaknesses, they expand strength. They increase the system's ability to absorb volatility. They widen buffers, they build redundancy, they raise the ceiling of what the system can handle. Capacity expansion is the institutional version of growth, not emotional growth, not motivational growth, but structural growth. It's the process of becoming capable of handling more pressure, more responsibility, more volatility, and more uncertainty without breaking. Your life has capacity limits too. Stress testing reveals them, reinforcement expands them. Capacity expansion is how you build a future that doesn't require perfect conditions. After reinforcement, the system is not the same. It's stronger, it's cleaner, more stable, more resilient, more prepared for volatility. Institutions don't rebuild to return to normal. They rebuild to create a new environment, one that can withstand shocks that would have destroyed the old system. Your life needs the same transformation. Reinforcement isn't returning to who you were before the crisis, it's about becoming someone who can survive the next one. The new architecture is not a recovery, it's an upgrade. Institutions refuse to break the same way twice. It's one of their core principles. One weakness is exposed, then it's eliminated. One vulnerability is identified, then it's reinforced. One pattern collapses, then it's redesigned. Once failure occurs, the architecture is rebuilt so the failure cannot repeat. People rarely eliminate repeat failure. They survive a crisis, feel relieved, and move on, only to collapse the same way again when the next shock arrives. Risk reinforcement is the discipline of eliminating repeat failure. It's how institutions evolve, it's how you evolve. The goal of reinforcement isn't perfection, it's resilience, it's durability, it's strength under pressure. Institutions know volatility is inevitable, they know shocks are inevitable, they know pressure is inevitable. People forget this. They treat crisis like it's an interruption instead of a pattern. Risk reinforcement is how you stop being surprised by volatility. It's how you stop repeating the same failures. It's how you build a life that doesn't collapse when conditions change. Reinforcement is how you change your future, not by avoiding pressure, but by becoming someone who can withstand it. So, if you remember anything from this episode, remember this. Strength doesn't appear on its own. It's engineered, it's built, it's reinforced. Weakness doesn't disappear because you survived a crisis. Fragility doesn't heal because you learned a lesson. Patterns don't change because you want them to. Institutions know this. That's why they rebuild. That's why they reinforce. That's why they redesign systems after they break. Your life deserves the same discipline. If you want real strength, don't rely on hope. Rely on reinforcement. Don't assume resilience, engineer it. Don't wait for the next shock, prepare for it. Strength isn't about who you are in calm conditions. Strength is who you become after you rebuild. Thanks for listening to the Risk Manager's Guide to Money. If this episode helps you see your life in the way institutions see their systems after crisis, through redesign, reinforcement, and engineered resilience, share it with someone who's trying to build stability in a world that doesn't stay stable for long. Institutions don't survive because they're lucky. They survive because they rebuild. And now, so will you. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's a great time. I appreciate you listening. See you in the next episode. Signing off.